welcome everybody as you kind of join in. We're just doing some pre-show banter, so to speak, as we kind of get ready for the webinar. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started here in a few minutes, but we're just enjoying some discussions around the good old days and how we can adjust and how we can make today the good old days, right? So. But,
Nick, I was saving this until the pre-show banter started. You have to explain your shirt to everyone.
Do I though? I mean, I feel like it's one of my favorite shirts. It gets me the most attention, so obviously, But there are people who don't know who Steve Irwin is, and so I'm like, it's Steve Irwin, and he's holding a crock, and they look at me like, I'm like, well, you can't be in my life anymore. If this shirt doesn't hit for you, then you're dead to me.
I could not tell that was Steve Irwin, so now I
couldn't either. Now that you say that, that's genius. Yeah.
It's Steve Irwin holding the crock.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh, they're blurring out the crock.
Well, I'm gonna have to get closer to this camera if people can't tell this is Steve Irwin holding the crock.
It's my dog's first name. Before I got in trouble with the person I was dating at the time, I called my dog Steve or Steve Irwin. She did not like the name. She's like, I will leave. I was like, okay, I'll change the name.
Like, called your dog Croc? What's wrong with you?
Croc? That'd be a good name too.
That's a good dog name.
That would be a good name for a dog.
I don't know. I'm a big fan of naming like pets like normal names, right? Like Brad, Steve, Dan, Charlie. Well, Charlie's a dog name, I guess, in some cases, but
Boise Dan.
Boise Dan.
Call your dog Boise Dan. Yeah.
Pittsburgh Dan.
Hey everybody, if you're joining us, you are in the right spot for the New Year's Cybersecurity Resolution webinar. We're just doing some pre-show banter. We'll let people trickle in as we kind of turn over to the top of the hour here, but really glad you could join us, and we'll get started here in a sec, but just enjoying some conversation and glad you could make it. So we will get started in about 1 minute. We'll let people finish off their lunch break, or maybe they're just getting on their lunch breaks. So we're excited to have you. But yeah, the Boise Dan, Pittsburgh Dan, I don't know that we're going to get away from it. It's just going to grow.
We can't. Yeah.
It's too perfect.
Yeah.
It is. Although I feel like you're probably the top Dan in Boise. I'm definitely not the top Dan in Pittsburgh. There's much greater Dans.
There's much greater Dans in the world than
with great Dan comes great responsibility. So.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So, all right. Well, I have 11:01 Mountain Time, so we can go ahead and get this show started. Thanks everybody for joining us. You are here joining PlexTrac and Echelon Risk and Cyber for our New Year's Cybersecurity Resolution webinar, all around creative and continuous pen testing. Pen testing, I think, is everybody's favorite topic on this panel. Near and dear to all of our hearts, and so you're in for a fun hour to kind of discuss what the history of pen testing has been traditionally and how it's evolved over time, and how we see it evolving into the future, especially into 2022. And excited that you could join us for this webinar today. Joining me, if you're not familiar with who I am, if you're not a PlexTrac customer, or been in the PlexTrac circle, I'm the founder and CEO of PlexTrac. Was a former penetration tester. I haven't done a pen test in a while, so I'm a little jealous, but I cut my teeth in the DoD and then moved into private sector and had my niche in application security. I earned the OSCP way back in the day, and I feel guilty for saying I have it now, seeing how harder it seems to be. But I guess once an OSCP, always an OSCP. But that's a little about me. I'm excited to be hosting this webinar today. Dan, take it away from here.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Boise Dan. I'm Pittsburgh Dan, otherwise known as Dan Desco. I'm CEO, managing partner of Echelon Risk and Cyber. I've had the pleasure of leading some great, talented penetration testing teams over the years, and work closely with David here, who's on our team today, and This is definitely a topic that is super near and dear to our hearts, and also a fun topic. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Yeah, so I guess I'm next because that's my photo. So I'm David. I'm the offensive security lead at Echelon. I like to explain that basically what that means is I lead a merry band of emulated criminals. So, we do everything from the physical up to the red teaming, the logical side of the house. I come from a big four red team background. Used to do it for the Fortune 100 companies. It was a lot of fun. It was grand old time. But I met Dan. And he convinced me that there's a fun way of doing it, and I've been enjoying it ever since. Prior to that, I am prior special operations cyber, so I used to do this for real. Had a lot of fun doing that. I won't talk too much about some of that stuff, but I'm definitely willing to share how that experience has helped us grow pen testing as a whole.
Yeah, thanks, David and David and Dan for joining us. Nick, tell us a little about yourself and why. Yeah. I'm excited that you joined us today for sure.
Very cool. So I am a security researcher, and I'm offensive. I've known Dan DeCloss, or Boise Dan, for a while, and been connected with the PlexTrac story, and really enjoyed using that as a user. My background is in pen testing. I was in the military and the Signal Corps as well. Spent some time in the DoD, moved into private sector, and spent a long time in consultative pen testing, offensive security. From that of a practitioner to leadership within a consultative practice, moved into red teaming, and really gotten a lot of insight and a lot of different, my hands in a lot of different places to be able to hack and crack. And that's kind of my background. And I look forward to just being able to paint a picture of some of my insights from my experience from wearing a lot of different hats. And hopefully it won't be too offensive.
No, great. Well, yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. I mean, I've been excited to spend the hour with you all, and thanks for everybody for attending, and we hope this will be worth your time. We definitely put some effort into it. So here's kind of the agenda, what we want to talk through today. We're going to give a little bit of the history of penetration testing. I mean, some folks may not have as deep of a background as some of us might have, and so kind of how pen testing has evolved over the last 10 to 15 years. And then really dive into what does it mean to have a continuous mindset around penetration testing, right? And how do you get more creative into your pen testing program, and even adapting pen testing as a programmatic approach? And then why shouldn't you do this, right? Why shouldn't you do penetration testing? And I think we'll also touch on, what does it mean to be mature enough to do penetration testing? And I think you'll be surprised at kind of where we land on that, because I think it's an important topic that a lot of people might have a misnomer or misconception of. And then we will have some time for Q&A at the end, but we do always allow for questions in the Q&A section. So if you have any questions during the conversation, we want this to be interactive as possible. So please pop those in, and we'll try to get them built into the conversation, or either save them for later. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing so we can just chat. Let's talk a little bit about the history of penetration testing. I mean, I have my perspective. I kind of was exposed to penetration testing back in the late 2000s, 2007, 2008 timeframe. Back then, it was kind of a very expensive endeavor. It took a large amount of skill, and not that it doesn't today, but I mean, it was a very expensive thing that people saved up for quite. You didn't consider it something that you were going to do very often, right? And then I think over the years, as technology has progressed, as tools have progressed, skill sets have, more exposure has come into the penetration testing world. We've been able to automate a lot more things, have a lot more resources for some of the more advanced attacks, which allow for more continuous testing, which is kind of what the goal of the day's topic is. What's your guys' perspective? And maybe Nick, we'll start with you, and then David and Dan. But how has pen testing evolved in your eyes, and as you've been a practitioner?
Yeah, it's funny you're talking about the OSCP. When I started in the DoD, and 05, 06 timeframe. I took the OSCP in 2009, and at that time, in the organizations I was around, the idea of people were mispronouncing it, calling it pin testing. It was not something that people really understood about the idea of let's set up our detective and preventative controls like our firewalls and stuff. And I remember one of my first jobs was as an IT auditor, and I came in and I was auditing these checklists against controls, in the old DoD auditing days. And so the idea was like the checkbox said, do you have a firewall? And that was the control, yes or no. And I was like, well, does it work? Is it blocking what you expect? Can you see what things? And so it's interesting, I think early on, folks really it was I don't know if you want to say head in the sand, but the idea of you have these controls and you turn them on, you turn on your firewalls, you turn on your IDS, you turn on all these things, and then you just kind of cross your fingers and hope it works. And I think there's been a myriad of reasons why there's been an evolution and a maturation. Some of it's regulatory. You have governing bodies or regulatory entities are saying you need to practically test these controls. Some of it's because of breach. Way back in the day in consulting, you got called to do a pen test because somebody had been breached. And so then after their remediation going forward, they were like, we got to do some pen testing because we don't want to get hacked again.
Well, they got the free pen test. They got breached.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
So what about yourself? What about yourself, Dan? What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the whole concept in my mind has developed from a sort of one-time, like expensive ordeal that, you could maybe only do it once a year, right? To this new sort of thought where it should be just a regular sort of sharpening of the saw exercise, right? In a constant sort of like cat and mouse leveling up type of situation. Yes, same time, I think back in 2006, 2007, I worked on a team that was launching a pen testing service. And yeah, the tools were very expensive. They had a lot of limitations, right? And it was very heavily based on, I'll call it vuln scanning and then some auto ponage with whatever the tools could do. And then, a few other things tossed in. Fast forward, 10, 15 years later, and now we have thousands of open source tools and a huge community contributing to everything that's out there. And you've got autonomous tools that are out there now. And then you have threat actors that are just exponentially, grown on that end. So to me, it's really evolved into something that, you do once a year or whenever you could afford it to, like, this is a constant thing that should be just a good part of a great mature security program if you want to continually level up.
Yeah, this is something that I feel like I don't really have a whole lot of experience in it as far as like the early days of pen testing, right? Because when I was in the military, I knew of red teaming, right? Because we red team bases all the time. But like pen testing, when I was getting out there, like, oh yeah, you could do this as a job, and I was like, oh, that's super neat. But as I started like searching into this job and looking at really like, where did it come from? Why is it, where is it coming from? A lot of the change that it's been driven has been from crime, right? Like moving traditional crime into cyber crime. And I mean, now we're starting to look at more of like a hybrid model of crime, right? Which is really driving the need for penetration testing, which makes it so that you have more competitors in the space, which make it, cheaper in a sense because everyone's trying to get the work a little bit. So that's the way I've seen like price driven downwards, at least to be more affordable. But that hasn't changed the trend of what we're seeing with like, hey, threat actors are now moving more and more away from just being like, okay, yeah, we'll make some a USB drive, dump all the money in this ATM, right? Now it's a little bit more like, hey, let's social engineer a bank and just steal $1 billion instead, right? Like the Bangladesh bank heist back in the day. So this overall change has been driven by crime, and where we're at now, the way I see it is it leads into our continuous pen testing, right? Like we need to start looking at this completely different than what we've been looking at before.
Yeah, and I think it's evolved too. I mean, in terms of just like the motivations in from the security teams in general, right? I think pen testing has continued to take a larger role in the security program because it really does emulate how you might get breached, right? And it gives teams that perspective. And so I think the value has continued to be more recognized in a global perspective rather than, the people that can afford it, they see the value, so they know they're going to continue to start doing it, and build it into their program. But then there's other folks like, I mean, I definitely remember 10 years ago, like people like, oh, we're not even mature enough to go to get a pen test. And you're like, well, I mean, you probably are already hacked, right? I mean, you probably already had one, right? But like, as more breaches have become more notable, right, and more public, I mean, I think those of us that were in the DoD back in the day knew all these things were going on, but it was just never publicized or couldn't be publicized. And I mean, I think that the most distinctive one to me that I was like, hey, now we're getting big time in terms of the news was back, I think it was '08 with like the Adobe and the Google hacks, right? I mean, like big deals that made news, before it didn't make news. And so I think people have definitely continued to recognize the value that you get out of a good penetration test. So with that, there's been more attention. Yeah, go ahead.
Dan, just to add on to that before we move on, I mean, I would also say I've seen industries that I think are just now getting wise to that fact and just catching up, right? So there was a whole swath of industries that, we don't have to go through the list, but that haven't invested into cyber over the past, couple decades because they really haven't had to, right? The threat that they've been facing wasn't really interested as much in them because they didn't have data to steal. They didn't take a mass volume of credit card transactions. There was no health data, right? But now all of a sudden, the threat landscape has changed so much with things like ransomware and those types of attacks where now everybody is a juicy target. But more so, these companies that in these industries that have not traditionally invested in cyber or have ever done these exercises. And it's still shocking to me sometimes to see, right? We'll talk to a client or a potential client, and they'll be like a big company, and sometimes it might even be a public company. And it's like, yeah, we're thinking about getting our first, pen test done, or this is maybe our second or third one ever, and we're just like, really? Like, so I think it just goes to show that we're still in the early innings of, cyber maturity for a lot of industries, and a lot of industries are really just still learning about this.
Yeah. No, I think it's, it's fascinating. I mean, like, having been on the vendor side of security now for the last few years, when I talk to investors, right, because they talk about like, hey, what kind of people would you be selling to? And they, typically like to think in terms of like Fortune 500, Fortune 2000, those kinds of things. And I'm like, I speak more in terms of like security team maturity, right? Because like we'll talk to people that have multi-billion dollar companies in revenue and are still just trying to get vulnerability management up and running, right? I mean, so like there's distinctive differences between the company size versus the security maturity of the team, and so that so like that's where we try to map out how we can help facilitate that. I think it leads into. Oh, go ahead, Nick. Were you gonna ask?
No, what was it going to lead into? Because I might lead into that, which is leading into that, which is leading into that.
Well, I think how do you make it more programmatic? How do you make it so you do show the value on a continuous basis, and where we always emphasize is that, hey, you need to be getting better as a security program, right?
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad that I let you lead in my lead in to lead into your lead in, because it's interesting when you think about security assessment and testing. It's a cost center. It's a line item that's not making you any revenue, and so traditionally, if you look, that's going to be a tough sell. Even if you're not talking about like a services organization or somebody that's got a product, if it's not something that's integral, if the mindset of the organization or senior leadership is one that security is a cost center that I'm paying for all this training. It takes experts to hire experts. So I need to hire experts to hire this Mobius strip of experts and all this tooling and all this stuff. Creating a culture of security wherein you identify that the idea that it'll probably be a problem for us in our bottom line if we don't invest in these right things. That has been an interesting, I think, dynamic that we've seen organizations mature. And then there's also things that could be their own, and I'm sure there's other webinars talking about like cyber insurance and those different things. And there's legislature, right? There's some, if you look into it, there's some scary legislature about holding certain types of entities and officers and different things in companies, certain types of liability that are going to come into play. So it's trying to decide if you're going to reward the right behavior or chastise the wrong behavior. But organizations that I see that really nail it are the ones that come together and say, I understand that this is an investment in something I can't see right now. Because as a security practitioner, when you are actively being hacked, I think I'm straight up taking it from a Dilbert comic, I think. But like, if you're straight up being hacked, senior leadership can roll in and be like, what? You're the security pros. What are we paying you for? And then when you're not being hacked and things are running smooth, they're like, well, things are running smooth. We're not getting hacked or attacked. What are we paying you for? So the idea of making sure that the investment in security, I think the aha moments come from folks who understand that the value of practically and technically testing what they've spent millions of dollars to invest in, their tooling, their telemetry, and their controls, to really see if it works. Like, to me, that's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you want to do that? But then the last note I have about the idea of maturing. So in my mind, we've had this maturation process where organizations that don't even have a clue of what they have on the inside or on the outside of their network, they certainly need to work on maybe some assessment type work to just gather the data. Then after they've gotten some rounds of assessment, they can move into a more exploitative and penetration testing. Now we've gotten organizations that, if you think about every rule of engagement or statement of work for a pen test you've seen, there's always somebody buried in there that says this assessment represents a snapshot in time, and basically being like, this is what we saw right here. So next month when you get popped and you come back and be like, you just pen tested us, be like, we're indemnified because this was a snapshot in time. Now the idea is to be sticky and kind of have this constant continuous assessment and testing so that new things pop up. They have this methodology to see what's going on. And organizations have to really go through the process, as painful as it may be at the genesis of the process, to start. And once you start, because I said it was the last thing. This is the last thing I'll say. One thing that I've always laughed at is we have an industry now where many times we're putting in controls to stop advanced persistent pen testers. So like as pen testing comes in and there's a codified methodology typically, and folks come in and there's a low hanging fruit and things we do quite a bit. Well, then just like David was saying, the threat actors and criminals are like, all right, they're watching the left hand. Let's use techniques and tools for the right hand. Then simulators come in and we decide to do those right things. But we really do have to, that's why this evolution from just snapshot in time assessments and pen testing to this continuous, we go into red teaming and advanced threat emulation and in a continuous paradigm, that's just going to continue to heighten your security posture.
That all resonates really well with me, right? Like I think switching the way that we look at cybersecurity in general, let alone penetration testing to business leaders, is that it makes the organization much more resilient, right? And these investments actually can affect the bottom line, right? And you see it in organizations that do get hit. And now I think with the new SEC requirements, and the reporting that's going on, there's some transparency more and more, and you can actually put more and more numbers behind, like, hey, this is what happens when this pipeline operator has default passwords on external devices or whatever it was. But that really resonates. And the other thing I think resonated really well, Nick, was the whole idea behind validation, right? Looking at this function as a validation function, right? So I think mature organizations, they use pen testing in the beginning to find all the holes and fix all the vulnerabilities. And then it shifts over time, right? Like it becomes less about that, and it becomes more about the continual validation of security controls that mitigate those risks, rather than, hopefully fighting the advanced persistent penetration tester.
Somebody just told me to stop looking confused. I was like, I'm reading.
This conversation kind of ties into actually a great question here that says, how do you demonstrate the value of a negative, right? Like, how do we change the conversation to our business leaders so that they can better understand what is the financial impact, right? Like something that Pittsburgh Dan here shared with me early this year, late last year, was like the cost of a breach. Like we all know that breaches are expensive, right? But what really is the true cost per record, right? Is it $1.50? Is it $3.50? Is it $15? What may it be, right? And there are resources out there like the IBM cost of a breach that provide you like the average dollar amount for these records, right? Are you a company that holds PHI data? I think when I looked at that, it was like $25 a record or something like that, right? Think about how many records you hold and how much that costs you. And when you put that up against the cost of a penetration test, depending on the size of your organization, right? Like it's pretty nominal, especially if you're looking at like, let's say you go one step forward and you go to red teaming, right? Which is a little bit of a longer engagement. It's still pretty nominal in comparison to the cost is going to break down to you when you lose those records.
Yeah.
So I think it's really just changing like the perspective into a dollar amount so that that the business leaders can see exactly what they lose if they don't.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, having been in security for almost 17 years now, and how often I'm telling people like security people have to be good communicators of risk, right? And be able to communicate business value, right? I mean, it's all over the board. And I think what we're seeing a lot is being able to indicate the value that you're getting out of your current security investment, right? Because companies have put a lot of money into security investment, and if penetration testers or hackers can just get all around it, then why did I buy that firewall in the first place, right? So actually being able to communicate it in here are the things that are working, and here's the pieces of the investment in our program that are doing a good job. Here's some of our gaps, and here's some things to go fix that. So I mean, it kind of leads into where we want to spend a majority of the rest of the time, is like that continuous concept of like how we're communicating the value, where the annual pen test is the more of that kind of spot check. And that's really what it should be. Like, hey, what have we missed throughout the year that we need to, or do we have blinders on somewhere in our program, where taking a continuous mindset really helps show the value of your current security investment, the security controls that you've been putting in place, rather than, oh, I don't see any value in a penetration test and it's expensive, right? Or it's a point in time kind of thing. What are you guys? How do you guys advise on building out a continuous program, and what are some things that you anticipate more companies doing in 2022?
I think for us particularly, it's not looking at just a single point of subject, right? Like I think a lot of times when people look at penetration tests, they assume like, all right, let's just look at the internal network, or we'll look at the external network, or we'll look at a web app, right? Like there are so many things that go into your network that you may not be considering that would lead to a point of breach, right? So as you start looking at how do you provide this as a continuous service, it's not necessarily doing an internal test every single week or every single month or something in that sense. It's changing up what test you're doing continuously throughout the year, right? Like, are you looking at your Active Directory? Have you checked to see if you have that you're following this guidelines, or these different aspects that get what's the word I'm looking for, put in or combined into your network that you may not be considering, or you may not even be looking at, right? Like, when's the last time you did a workstation breach and attack assessment, right? Like, where can people privilege escalate locally?
Did you want to hit on You had mentioned something a while ago that really was a neat concept, the idea of threat informed. Do you want to hit on that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. So something that we kind of lack in the United States is a framework like Tiber EU. And if anyone is not familiar with Tiber EU, it is a standard built by the European Central Banking System to conduct intelligence-led red teaming. Meaning it's not like just a red team where somebody comes in like me, like APT David, right, and says, I'm going to do it the way I want to do it with my type of malware, my type of MITRE attack TTPs and all that jazz. What really happens in order to be Tiber EU certified is you have to the red team has to go out and do threat intelligence on the client. They have to understand what the client is at risk from. You know, which APTs? Is it APT1, APT32? Who is it going to be, right? Figure out exactly how those APTs operate and then emulate, right? I think the best way of looking at it is we should no longer be calling red teaming. It's adversarial emulation. We're trying to emulate our adversaries in the same way that they operate. That's something I think that we need to start working into as a community coming into this next year, into and beyond, because traditional crime is gone. Traditional crime is now cybercrime, especially against big business, right? If we want to look at it. So we have to really start thinking about how do we change up the way we test so that it's more realistic and relevant to our clients than just being straight, all right, let's be APT David or APT tester.
A lot of these cases.
Go ahead, Dan.
Nick.
No.
Everybody wanted to talk.
I said go ahead, Dan, first.
You go.
Confusing here. Go ahead, Pittsburgh Dan.
No, that was great, David. And I think the point I wanted to make, which he mentioned, is just understanding who the threats are, right? And understanding the different types of threats that you could be up against. So it could be an APT, but it could also be, an insider threat. So depending on your organization, there could be a lot of material that might be, interesting to Russia or China or whomever. We're all too familiar with this. I mean, the Pittsburgh steel industry just a few years ago was the subject of scrutiny by APTs from China, right? So, but beyond there, right, like you see the FBI ringing the alarm bells late last year to a lot of the high-tech industries, and how some of these foreign nations are really targeting people that are working for some of these high-tech organizations that might still have people, back home in China, and they'll put the pressure on their family back home to steal information and give it back. They'll hold back healthcare from them, from their family in another country, in order to exploit, this type of stuff. So these things are real. And I think if there's one thing that 2020 or 2021 has shown us, is the unlikely scenarios, the things that we kind of like brush off in our usual risk assessments. Human beings are terrible at understanding the probability of things happening. We have no idea, right? Yep. We're very biased when we think something might happen or not. So there's a good chance that our probability ratings and our risk assessments are very wrong. So
you ever been on a test where somebody says, well, yeah, we would like to lower that severity. And you're like, why? I took over your environment with this flaw. And they're like, well, yeah, but you're super skilled. And it takes some esoteric knowledge. And so there's probably not that many people that could figure that out. So we're going to go ahead and ask that be lowered in severity. And you're like, that's not how risk management works.
No, exactly. But yeah, that was kind of the end of my point there. But it's really thinking about who's the threat.
Well, and I think it begs the question of like meeting either a partner where you have a continuous plan throughout the year to say like, okay, here's the threats that we really see popping up and that are applicable to you, or they know your business, so whether that's an internal team that you've hired or you've partnered with a group to have a model where you can actually do this on a continuous basis, I think is important. I think we're going to continue to see that more and more, especially as more automation comes into play with pen testing. And then I'm excited to see how, a lot of people are getting into penetration testing, right? There's a question in here about how do you get into it? And I'm sure all of us got into it in different ways. I probably got into the most formal one possibly could. So I'm probably an outlier that I went to graduate school and was trained by some of the best in the world, right? And then I just, got a job in it from there. But I'd be curious to kind of one, how do you build skill sets for your internal teams, and then also partnering with groups like Echelon to have more of this intelligence in this threat informed program.
So I want to key off of something that you said right there, though. You said partner a lot. And so when David mentioned threat-informed assessments and partnering, think about what's PlexTrac's tagline, the purple teaming platform, the concept of red versus blue. We all wargaming, we get it. There needs to be an adversary, there needs to be defenders. But if you think about this stump the chump concept that sometimes you enter in with pen testing, like the idea of the black box pen test, where you come in zero knowledge, and to derive value from that, the folks are spending a lot of money to get a black box pen test, which don't hear me wrong, there's value in snapshot and time assessments. I don't think that it's either or. I think it's augmenting and supplementing. Supplementing is not even, it's enhancing. It's finding efficiencies. And so the idea of a zero knowledge test gives you what somebody that has done no looking or spent a couple days doing some OSINT and intelligence on your environment, and that you derive some value from that. But after a certain point, the whole idea, and I've come into organizations that are they have an attitude of, well, you're going to get in, or if you don't get in, this isn't a good pen test. I think changing the mindset from an us versus them mentality and really embracing the concept. I know people dislike buzzwords. I understand when a new buzzword comes up, people want to be contrary to it and be so cool that they're against it. But really the idea of that purple team, of getting real close, because if you're going to test the efficacy of the controls, you need to probably know what's there and how it's configured. So going in and setting up engagements, somebody asked a question in the Q&A section, like how do as assessors, how do we indemnify ourselves? I don't really know legalese and contractual talk about indemnification, so I can't speak to that, but I can say that we're still partnering with the organization. They are the custodians of the data, they're custodians of the systems, and at the end of the day, they're responsible for it. We're responsible with putting in best effort under the controls of engagements. But when you talk about continuous assessment and testing, I think changing the mindset from we have a perimeter, we're paying you to breach our perimeter, to starting with the goal. What, like David was mentioning, what do you want to test? Do you want to test a business unit? Do you want to test detective controls for your EDR? Do you want to test your SIM? Do you want to test your personnel? Do you want to test all of these things? I think if you start with a goal first, then you can start working with a partner, right? Like you get with Echelon, you get with internal team, you get with whoever you get with, and you start formulating a plan that then you start to tweak it. And the cool thing when you switch from this, let me get a vendor every year, let me get 5 different vendors every 5, change it up. And I see the value in that. But when you get real close with a partner that you can start doing, whether it's an internal team or a partner that you bring in, and you start with a goal, you can really start deriving a lot more value in that and testing things that it's not just opportunistic, right? Like if as a pen tester, I get a chance to pop a box, neat. If I get a chance to hack at your EDR for a half a day and try and bypass it. If I can't, does it alert? Did you see it? Neat. That's all cool. But if I could sit there and spend 3 months working with you to really narrow down these goals and have these KPIs that say, look, we want to test if we alert on these types of things, and if we see it, and if we react to it, those types of stuff. So when you start talking about creating continuous pen testing, continuous assessment, because I think we do need to break people's habits. I think when you hear a term, sometimes you have this thing spot welded in your brain about what it means. And so we have to shake the term up so that we shake your mind up and disrupt a little bit. You start with a goal, you work backwards, emulate an adversary. But at the end of the day, the organization is still the one who is in control of the data. It's their responsibility to protect it, et cetera, et cetera. But And then you said about how to train people.
How to
That's a completely
so
different
educate.
thing.
Yeah, you hit two birds, one stone right there. But the other part was like as a lot of education. He says they say it feels like it comes off as if you do this, you'll become a pen tester. This is something that I've realized is coming out of the military, right? Like I mean, this is what 3-4 years ago. I'm bad with time, guys, so bear with me. But there was a pretty big barrier of entry, right? Like people were gatekeeping to get into this. Like, hey, if you don't come from the government, or you weren't a criminal, or you didn't know somebody, you're not getting into pen testing. That's been changing, and that's something that's changing in our space, which is kind of nice. We could probably comment a lot on all of that, because I'm pretty sure every single person on this call has seen some form
We
of
could
that
do a whole
happen.
nother webinar on
Yeah,
the
like,
career
hey, how do
tracks,
you
stuff like
break
that.
in?
Tee that up, Boise Dan. Tee up another webinar.
Yeah,
Getting into this.
I think with training, there's plenty of training resources out there to learn from, and those have been changing their communications as well to be more focused around the idea of how penetration testing is changing, right? Nobody's telling you, hey, penetration is one thing. Now they're like, hey, do you want to do web app testing? Do you want to do application testing? Do you want to like be an exploit writer and stuff like that? So it's finding a niche that you enjoy, because cyber is huge. It's something I tell all of my mentees. Cyber is massive. There's going to be an opportunity for you to try your hand at everything if you want that. But find something you enjoy. Make sure that you show that passion, and people will hire you, right? Like I hire based on passion and knowledge, not necessarily like where you went to school.
Yeah, I'm going to keep my mouth shut on this because this is so near and dear to my heart. If I start down this topic, talking about career progression, cyber careers, education, academia, training, all that stuff is something I'm super huge on. So I'm only going to say a couple words, and then I'm going to stop because I will take your afternoon. I really think
I had
it
to
would
cut
be cool
myself off.
Here's the thing. It takes experts to hire experts. So it's kind of tough for organizations to hire. And like when you're hiring a consulting company, a lot of times you're saying, I need your expertise that you've demonstrated in this area so it also takes experts to train experts, but there is a way to make it happen. And I don't know if I coined this term. I hope I did, because it would mean I'm coming up with something, but I don't know. But I like the idea of manufacturing comprehension. And I feel like there is a way to take theoretical knowledge. So you think about training and academia and different things, because a lot of people have very, very heavy emotional thoughts about this. Like some people will be very negative against one thing, like, oh, all OJT is all you need, on the job training is all you need. And then some people say, well, no, all you need is academia. And there's really a tension and a balance but I've seen it. And I've seen a lot of success in this concept of manufacturing comprehension and being able to, kind of like the Matrix, like inject into the back of the head, some of this knowledge. Because, a couple years ago, I would have told you, and I've changed my stance on this. I would have said, you got to spend 3, 4, 5 years in IT. You got to spend at least 2-3 years as a help desk or developer. You got to be in IT. Because when I came up, there was no job that was pen testing. You were just the smartest computer guy in the corner, and they said, you're smart with the scripts. Go do some things on the network. Like, yeah, all right. So, I've changed the script in my head where I said, there is a way to manufacture comprehension, so folks don't have to sit there and spend 10 years and become a crusty Linux admin, and then they're ready. Like you said, there's a lot of gatekeeping, but the resources out there. The last thing I'll say on that is just be cautious, be careful. There are a lot of folks who use a lot of pretty words, but you really need expertise is demonstrated and recognized by others. I actually just said that recently on a LinkedIn thing to somebody. So just be wary, and that's it.
And I think if you're like an aspiring pen tester, and I was a security director before I started or launched PlexTrac full time, and we had a guy on our team that he wanted to get into penetration testing, and so we worked in as our security team. We worked in the concept of like, hey, we're gonna spend more of our time focused on the proactive side of security, right? If you're not spending more time being proactive, you're always going to be in a reactive mode, right? You're always going to be fixing the legacy things, and the new things then become legacy, and then you're fixing those things, right? So trying to strike that balance. And so actually taking some initiative just with if you're just a current security analyst or even just an IT engineer, like there's plenty of resources out there now where you can actually begin to develop these concepts in just in little chunks, right? Like take the MITRE ATT&CK framework, for example, and go test certain small procedures that may be straightforward to those of us that have been in there a long time, but those are good places to get started. And that's how you continue to build that expertise and knowledge. I mean, I think we'd probably all agree that pen testers are at heart, big puzzle solvers, right? Like your mind just thinks in ways of like, how do I get around this, right?
Just ask what if. What if
Right.
I do this? What
Exactly.
if I do that?
Yeah. So there's certain elements to a personality that it takes to be a pen tester, right? No doubt. But you can train yourself in that way. I want to spend the last 15 minutes or so. We've talked in and around kind of like what it means to be in a continuous mindset and some creative techniques, thinking like the adversary, pulling in, and having more adversary related engagements. Why would you do this? And I guess we've already kind of talked about why we do this. How do you end up, concretely implementing something like this? And I'll let the Echelon guys start, and then Nick, and then I can add color where needed.
Yeah, I could sort of kick that off. I mean, I'd say luckily, there's a lot of good people doing a lot of good research and R&D in the field, right? And tooling has come quite a long way over the years. So from our perspective, we try to keep up with the latest and greatest of what's in the market, and from people that we trust. So we do have certain things that we like from a continuous pen testing process. Tools that can augment our people and what we do, where we're able to sort of leave behind some things in the client environment that we could schedule certain things to be regularly tested and run, right, and then plopped into and fed into a tool like PlexTrac, which allows us to interact with our clients in real time. And then, the value is we come in later, whether it's at the end of the quarter or at the end of the month, and, do the human-led piece of it, right? Where the tools can't get to, or the tools can't contextualize the data and take it those next steps. So, for us, I think it's all about kind of staying up on what's out there in the industry, testing it, validating it, seeing how it fits into your process, seeing how it could help with risk reduction and what the win-loss ratio is from a budgetary perspective when you bring these things in. But there are some cool ways to do these things now.
Yeah, I mean, as penetration testing has evolved, right? We've gotten away from having to really understand assembly code to do any sort of like cool hacky stuff. And we've come to the point where we can automate a lot of things to help like augment that time, right? Like we all know that time is precious to every single person. And when you're able to kind of change the focus from having to do some of the more low level tasks into being automated, you help reduce the cost overall for everybody, right? Because it still has a price tag at the end of the day, but that the way that we've been moving forward with new programming languages and capabilities, and like how the Windows API has changed like so much, even in Windows 11, right? Like we can change up a whole mess of our penetration testing to be more automated, to look at security vulnerabilities consistently, and then use the assembly code wizards out there to come in later and show like really how far the next steps can take, right? So you bring it that 90%, and then you showcase the final 10, periodically. And I mean, the 90% is really what most of the threat actors are going to try to abuse in the first place, right? They're going to look for the low hanging fruit. They're going to look for the easy privilege escalation. And you want to just find those right off the bat and have those like continuously reported, especially if they're not being fixed. We've all seen IT. I've been IT in my past. sometimes you put the Band-Aid fix and you forget to put the Band-Aid off and actually stitch up
Always.
the problem, right? Having
That's
something
called IT
continuous,
architecture. That's architecture. Right there.
yeah, having something continuous like allows you to remember, like, hey, I'm bad with remembering. Sometimes I call it my ADHD brain, right? I get distracted by one thing or another. It's like having that reminder in your Outlook or your Asana or whatever you may be using, to just go, hey guys, like, this is still an issue, just go fix it. That's the way I've seen it. Just like our constant involvement has made this possible.
I think we keyed in some words there I want to highlight that just rip the Band-Aid off, so to speak. Automation, it can be a dirty word to a lot of people. I think from a consultancy, folks will shy away from using the term automation because they're like, well, if you're using automation, what am I paying you for, right? Why am I paying you big bucks? And so I think that's a mindset that we have to change. And we have to understand that embracing automation as yet another tool in a practitioner or in an organization's toolbox, and being able to find the right balance, like David was mentioning, where first off, there's a difference between an expert implementing automation and folks who have never had the opportunity to implement that same automation, right? How many organizations, let's just use like traditional scanning from back in the day. You come in based on their policies, their background, their experience, how they do. They could scan their environment every week, and then you come in a black box sense, and you can find a lot of different things. I say, how'd you find that? You're like, well, this was just the scan. I haven't even started really working yet. So the idea of understanding, like I know back in the day too, I'm probably going to use some offensive terms here, whatever they're called, the pen test in a box, the automation suites. A lot of times practitioners would be so against those tools that will automate. There are dedicated tools that automate some of that activity, but understanding, as long as everybody understands their place in the ecosystem, which I do, I know it's another tool. It's the ability to automate things that allow me then to handle expertise and implement manual activity in a far more time respecting way. But then there's in everything balance. So you don't just rely on all your automation. We all understand that automation misses. You can't adapt. You can't improvise. There's contextual stuff that the human element to come in and provide that expertise is still valuable. And the ability to tune that automation appropriately is still there. So I think organizations that I'm seeing having a lot of success in this are organizations that are first and foremost partnering, and they're not treating this as like, we're going to be your friend for a month, but there's a relationship that's established. They become trusted advisors, and you've got yourself a year or two of learning the environment, learning the business, learning what matters, learning the pain points, tuning and refining this automation. I don't want to keep saying the word automation because it's tough to say for me. No, but when you create this paradigm where you're mixing the both of your people, your personnel, your tools, and part of the tools being automation in an expert fashion, organizations like Echelon and like others that are taking products like PlexTrac that allow the curation of disparate data sets and really giving you that view of being able to come in and multiple teams be able to collaborate. So collaboration, partnership, there's just a lot there that I see some organizations who are treating continuous assessment and testing like, well, let's just do what we always do, pen test, and do it a lot and charge them half because that's what they'll pay for. And that's not the answer. The answer is to evolve your practices and to evolve and mature along with the people that you're partnering with. Bazinga.
I think the collaboration point is important, right? And one, I mean, it definitely helps both teams train, like one and know the environment. And I think there's the black box mentality, which is good for some of those point in times. And hey, did we miss something? But then having an internal team or like a team with a partner, like an external partner that says like, hey, we're going to come in for the next year. We're going to test these things, and we know your environment and communicate the risks within the context of your organization are really vital. That's what shows the value, right? And it's how you are validating your worth in the organization, right? Because I think any security is always going to be viewed as a cost center, right? And so continuing to show like, here's how we're providing value to the organization is important. And that only leads to, can you communicate effectively what you've been working on? Are you, what are the priorities that your team's focused on, and why? And then, how are you showing value for what you should be working on next and investing in next? I think automation tends to get labeled poorly or wrongly to a degree. I mean, automation's goal is to save time, right? Pen testers' time is precious. Everybody's time is precious, right? And so you're getting paid to do effective work, right? And so eliminating some of those menial tasks is really the goal of automation. So when we talk about continuous assessment, I think there's a lot of good penetration testing platforms out there today, right? That didn't exist, and they're not going to find everything, and they'll never claim that they're going to find everything and that they're going to prevent your next breach, but it certainly gives you more than what you had, right? And I think they're good, but like the phrase that I've clued into a lot is like, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly, right? Like, do something, right? It's like losing weight, like go for a walk. If you can't, go for a run, right? So I think starting to incorporate some of those concepts, whether you start with an automation platform or start manually, and start really learning, taking atomic red team, taking a MITRE ATT&CK, taking training from the OSCP, and applying those concepts into your environment. I think those are all good ways to get started, but make it programmatic. Be very disciplined. I've seen a lot of people kind of fall off the rails because it's like they want to get started, but they're just not disciplined and like, hey, we're going to schedule time every week or every month to do this. We have one customer, they do a great job purple teaming every Thursday, right? It's like their Thursday thing. They pick some things out of MITRE, they do it every Thursday, and it's demonstrably better. Their security posture has improved demonstrably, right? So
think about that one. I'm looking at a question there that was actually early on, and that ends up, it's a little bit going backwards, but you look at it, says what, the ratio of organizations that use these tests, whether it's a continuous test, a snapshot in time of these assessments, as a springboard for enhancing their security posture, right? Versus just doing it because they have to. So I think making sure that as an organization, you recognize that the end result of a test is not like, the test is not a mean in and of itself. I've seen organizations who like, their goal is to schedule and make the pen test happen. When it's done, they're like, okay, the pen test has happened. The pen test happens, and then the work starts. The security assessment happens, the continuous assessment. So if you have a sweet partner that's doing some continuous assessment and you're not taking action on those to enhance, you really have to reprioritize and understand that just having the assessment infrastructure going and just having the assessment done, putting into practice the mitigations or mediations. I don't know what the ratio of people. I've partnered with tons of organizations that are fantastic, and have passionate people who are like, yes, I want the results of your test so I can impact, and I can affect positive change. Let's all everybody on here make a vow that that's how you'll be. Make change, make changes, do good things.
Amen. Yeah, amen. I mean, yeah, the whole idea is to like get to more of that purple team style approach, right? Where it is to the point where there is ultimate collaboration, between everyone that's involved, and everyone understands the end goal, and everyone is like driving towards that same end goal of reducing that overall attack, surface, the risk reduction. And when everybody has the same goal, and the goal isn't to, hey, I want to look cool as a pen tester, and I want to bring some skulls and drop my skulls on the table at the end of the pen test. You flip that, and it's collaboration, and awesome things can happen when you get to that sort of level. So be like that, like Nick said.
Well, also organizations that offer the services, like graduating their services. So a perfect example is PlexTrac. Like, instead of performing an assessment and handing a steaming pile of report, right, and testing like we did in 2010, leveraging the new way to do things. And that's having a platform where you can get your data and interact with ticketing systems. And really, like, one of the beauties of PlexTrac is being able to, the end results of when I do testing then become tickets that have to be solved, right? So everybody needs to up their game. And I think that most of the people on this call are willing to help them up their game.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think when we talk about the full value of a penetration test, what do you do with that at the end? Whether you're using PlexTrac or not, I mean, you still gotta the value is, hey, we found something that has identified a gap in your security posture, and how are you going to go and improve that, right? And I think that's the true value that you get out of it, as long as you actually go do something about it, right? We'll open it up for any other questions. We've got a few minutes left. We've had some great interaction. Thanks to everybody for chiming in. We can certainly take on some of these. So let's see.
I'm not going to be clear.
And some of these are long, but
need to get my readers. Hold on,
yeah,
I gotta read these here.
Maybe some of these we might answer offline as well. So, in fact, I think the two that are in there we'll probably just answer offline. But so Dan and David, like, your predictions for 2022. I mean, what do you anticipate coming at us this year in any regard? I'd be curious to know kind of what you're looking forward to.
Here's where I get to plug. Dan actually wrote a nice little article about his predictions, which I'm sure he's planning to reference. But I mean, personally, on what I've seen as far as trends coming along, right? Like, ransomware is not going to slow down. It's going to be one of the largest increases, even comparative to last year, which was a large increase, right? But I think with the inclusion of now Windows 11, we're going to see a lot more interesting attack vectors come out of that, because the way that the Windows API changed, which are going to be in some ways more dangerous in their stuff. That's just what I've seen based off my own research. So, hold off for now, in my opinion. Hold off on upgrading to Windows 11. But as far as like crime goes, like, we're going to just see ransomware just shoot up even more, right? It's way too profitable not to. The crime as a service model that the underground has kind of taken is successful, and they're earning money faster than before. So, be vigilant, be smart with what you guys are looking out for. Invest well.
Yeah,
that's what I got.
David is right. I did author a little article about it. I sent the link out, but I would say, top ones to keep in mind off the top here that play well with what we're talking about here today is supply chain attacks. I think are going to continue to really increase, and that's something that you could test for in your evaluations, right? You could say, okay, this box that has this software on it, let's do a assumed breach scenario, and what can happen from there. So I think that's going to continue to happen. I think one of the areas that I've been preaching about that pretty much happened with Log4j, I'm not saying I predicted that. I'm saying that open source software is going to continue to be sort of an area of a lot of scrutiny. I think hackers are going to try to infiltrate open source software more and more and more. I think Log4j is a perfect example of the impact that open source can have and just how ubiquitous it is in people's environments. So I think assessing for that, understanding your footprint from those sort of supply chain types of issues should be a big part of your security program here in this coming year.
What about you, Nick? What do you see?
I don't remember what the question was, but if it's predictions, I think that the new Nicolas Cage movie is going to do well. I'm going to be the first one to see it. And that's all I've got to say.
Supporting Nick? Is that Nick supporting Nick's?
Dan's can support Dan's. Nick's can support Nick's.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. No, I agree. I think what you guys said is accurate. And I won't comment on Nick Cage movies, but I did like National Treasure. So, but
Very serious.
yes.
That's a wholesome one, Dan.
Yeah, but no, I'm excited. I'm excited to see how the industry is continuing to evolve, right, and grow. And I think that, as more and more investment has been made in security, everybody's starting to converge on how do we show value, and how do we think like an attacker? Because at the end of the day, every security team's job is to identify ways that they are exposed, right? And how you know that is by how attackers are doing their work, right? And the only way to be able to test that is by simulating it and emulating attacker techniques and procedures, and testing the controls and the investments that you've put in place and the processes, right? We all talk about processes and policies and procedures, and that's all important. So I think that, what's exciting, and what I predict in 2022 is not only are attacks going to increase, but I think we're going to continue to have better ways to simulate and emulate them and be prepared ahead of time. So, well, we are past the top of the hour. So thanks everybody for sticking around for a couple of extra minutes. Dan, David, Nick, thank you so much for taking time out of your guys' busy schedule to join us. Everybody else, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to hit us up. We're all on LinkedIn. I didn't provide any contact information, but you can reach out to us, and we're happy to answer questions. And definitely wish you all the best in 2022.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Dan.